Then the countdown began.
なんということだ。
I still hadn't recovered from the shock of the memory collector's words. If I disappeared, then the Barbora Empire would also disappear. Japan would be at peace. Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad ending after all. After all, I was a superhero, fighting to defeat evil invaders.
その悪も俺が想像したってことなのか。
I thought I had been fighting a mission of righteousness, but it had all been a game of my own making. I continued to laugh, a hollow sound. Just then I heard Haruna's voice.
なんだ、帰っていなかったのか。
もう帰っても何の意味もないから。
Haruna was sitting beside me, as if wanting to warm the chill in both our hearts.
みんな行っちゃったね。
いつの間に。親父とジャックは。
I had been so shocked I hadn't even noticed them leave.
パパさんはママさんを探しに行くって。ジャックさんも一緒について行ったよ。
そうだったか。
I seem to remember them saying something like that, but the memory was very dim.
ヤマト君、ああ、わかったって言ってたのに。
She responded in a whisper and reached for my father's manuscript. On one sheet of paper was a drawing of Haruna and I when we were younger.
私、ヤマト君の幼なじみの女の子がモデルなんだって。ストライカーが子供の頃、一緒に遊んだ女の子。ほら、ちゃんとここに登場してるよ。死んだと思っていたお父さんやお母さんの思い出。子供の頃、一緒に遊んだヤマト君との思い出。私の人生、全部嘘だったんだね。
Was it? I didn't know how to answer her. Just like me, Haruna was starting to accept that she was a fictional character. No, she already existed before that whole memory collector thing happened. Haruna and I were the same, and as I thought that over, her eyes began to well up with tears.
私、このまま消えちゃうの？自分が作り物で本当の思い出を何も作れないままで消えちゃうのなんかやだよ。私たちって何もかも嘘っぱち。本当のことなんか一かけらもなかったんだね。
I felt a stabbing pain in my chest as Haruna began to sob. The words came unbidden to my lips.
全部が全部嘘だったわけじゃないさ。全部が嘘っぱちじゃない。本当のことだって一つある。
I grabbed Haruna's shoulders and looked straight into her face.
ヤマト君。
俺も自分のことを軍人だと思い込んでいた。軍の命令が絶対だと思い、何も考えず本土防衛に邁進してきた。ところがそんな命令なんて全部嘘っぱちだったんだ。何も守るものなんかなかったんだ。だけどそれでも一つだけ真実があった。本当に守らなければならないものが一つだけあったんだ。
守らなくてはならないものって？
お前一人を守れなくて何が正義のヒーロー、電撃ストライカーだ。
It was the first time I had ever said the name, Dengeki Stryker, the hero's name. The words set my blood rushing. My still heart began to beat again.
俺はお前を守りたい。この思いだけは真実に間違いない。
でも私は
お前を消滅などさせない。いざとなったら俺の命と引き換えにしてでも守ってやる。
Haruna couldn't respond, but just looked at me silently. New tears began to run down her cheeks. She hugged me as tight as she could.
ヤマト君。
She clung to me. I felt her tears fall against my chest. I returned her embrace, pouring all my pain into the act of stroking her hair.
春菜。
ヤマト君。
Haruna looked up at me. I looked back at her. Our faces were inches apart. Stained with tears, her face was so beautiful, it took my breath away. As my heartbeat grew louder, Haruna slowly lowered her eyes. The beating in my heart grew more violent. Was she waiting for me to kiss her? No, she couldn't be, but if she was, it would be unmanly of me to hesitate, wouldn't it? My heart was so conflicted. Not that I am making excuses, but it had been ages since I had put any thought into matters of love. While I continued to think it over, Haruna put her hands on my shoulders. She drew her face closer. It was too late to back out now. I heard my resolve, had Haruna tight, and softly brushed her lips with mine. Well, I guess we ended up on Haruna's route, huh? The moment our lips touched, I felt the heat welling up inside me. Her lips were so soft, the moment I tasted them, I felt the room around me go white. The instincts I had spent so many years repressing came flooding back in an instant. My body was so hot, it felt numb. To make matters worse, Haruna began to whisper to me. I couldn't answer her right away. Her words soaked into my heart, melting the part of me that was frozen inside. As she requested, I gave her another light kiss. Our kisses grew slightly longer now. I savored the sweetness of her lips. Yamato's body began to itch from the sensation of the soft, slender body in his arms. He was still a young man after all. But because Yamato had never even masturbated before, that's impossible. He wasn't sure what to do with his impulses. Unable to stop his searching thoughts, he tore away from Haruna's lips.
やめよう。これ以上は危険だ。
危険って？
つまり、察してくれ。俺もどうやら男なわけでだな。
Despite my dissembling, Haruna seemed to understand. Her eyes opened wide. But she quickly recovered and then smiled shyly.
いいよ。ヤマト君なら。
いいって、な。俺たちはまだ学園生で
だってもう卒業なんかできないかもしれないし、ずっとヤマト君に捧げられればって。それともヤマト君は私のことを嫌い？
She smiled mischievously, but her gaze was earnest. She was right, we might be disappearing soon. I realized the urgency of the situation. If I balked now, we might never have this chance again.
俺もお前が好きだ。愛してるってやつかもしれない。
ありがとう。本当に嬉しいよ。
Haruna's brilliant smile was my answer. My heart filled up with gladness. All my hesitation and reserve vanished.
分かった。必ずお前を救って、ちゃんと責任を取ってみせる。
Haruna looked away. She lay down on the floor. I reached out a trembling hand toward her, then hesitated.
どうしたの？
すまん。女の服をどう脱がせたら、そもそもどうしたらいいのかわからなくて。
Just rip it to shreds like a real man. Just kidding.
笑うな。俺はこんなの初めてで。
ごめんね。でも別にバカにしているわけじゃないから安心して。
Haruna reached for her own buttons.
とりあえず一緒に服を脱いで合図したら目を開こう。
おう。
I closed my eyes as requested and began fumbling to remove my clothing. I heard the sound of undressing through the darkness. It stirred a pounding anticipation in my chest. I opened my eyes. Haruna was there, her shirt only half off. So I guess it's time for me to cut. So I'll see you in a second.
Haruna.
Okay, I think we are done here.
思い残すことはない。ありがとう、ヤマト君。
バカ野郎。縁起でもないこと言うんじゃない。これが最初で最後だなんてありえないんだから。本当の思い出だって俺たち二人でこれからたくさん作ればいい。
そうだね。
そのためにもいつまでもふぬけている場合じゃない。
ヤマト君、よかった。いつものヤマト君だ。
ああ、とりあえず打てる手は打とう。
Haruna snuggled up to me and I embraced her. A new sense of determination shined in my eyes. Chapter 10 End. Would you like to save? No, that's not necessary. Chapter 11 Showdown! 3 seconds to annihilation. 3 seconds? Returning from his trip over the Pacific, Roche, wasn't it Roches, landed on a building in the harbor. He was in a black mood.
たく、こんなのどう報告すりゃいいんだよ。
There had been no sign of his homeland. Roches felt his heart begin to well with anxiety.
まあ、本部に聞けばなんかわかるだろう。
Roches pulled a transmitter from his pocket.
本部、応答しろ。
No response came.
こちらロッシュ、誰でもいいから応答しろ。くそ、誰も出やしねえ。一体どうなっているんだ。
Angrily, Roches threw the transmitter on the ground. Just then he heard a voice over the speaker.
バルボラのやつか。聞こえるか。
聞こえるが、誰だ貴様。
俺はストライカーゼロだ。正式には帝国陸軍第0式全領域擁撃支援工兵、通称ストライカーゼロだ。
なんだと？てめえ、手が長いんだよ。
The response was an angry one. I tried to keep my calm. The important thing was that I had made contact. Given what had to happen next, I couldn't afford to lose it.
罵り合う前に一つだけ確認させろ。今、お前の足に何か異常が起きていないか。
足だと？ってなんだこりゃ！
His response was one of angry shock, as I suspected the same thing was happening to him.
もしかして消えかけていたりするんじゃないか。
まさかこれもてめえの仕業なのかよ。
違う。現に俺の足も消えかけている。
なんだと？
このままだとお互い8時間以内に全てが消滅するらしい。
そりゃ一体。
詳しい話を説明するから今すぐにこれから言う場所に来い。消滅を阻止するためにお前たちにも協力してもらうぞ。
I gave him the rendezvous point, then cut the transmission. No, we would settle this. I sensed a presence in front of the apartment. It must have been him.
ここの201号室か。汚ねえアパートに住みやがって。
Don't you notice something? I hear the familiar uncultured voice, followed by a knock on the window. It would be our first contact outside of battle. I had to handle this carefully.
ストライカー、いるか？
おう、来たか。
I suppressed my anxiety and opened the window, looking out at my visitor.
あ？
おや？
We both tilted our heads, almost in unison. Hadn't I seen him somewhere before? Obviously, we had met before on the field of battle, so some familiarity was natural, but this was something else. I kept my head tilted, trying to account for the bizarre sense of déjà vu. He stared back at me, seeming to do the same. Just then...
お隣の結城さんじゃねえか！
あんたこそ隣のミハイルさん。
How could this have happened? Could it be that my kind-hearted neighbor was really a Barboran cyborg? He was probably thinking the exact same thing. The tension between us immediately dispersed. I couldn't believe I hadn't realized it earlier.
どうしてあんたがってこのアパート俺の住んでるところじゃねえか
We spent some time staring at each other silently, feeling extremely stupid. I finally led Rogers into my room, then told him the story of Mirror and the memory collector.
まあそういうわけなんだ。俺はミラーとやらの居場所はわからない。だからバルボラに頼むしかない。お互い生き延びるためにここは一つ協力してくれないか。
まあ今回は協力しねえと仕方ねえかもな。
Rogers sounded a little dubious, but the reality of his disappearance made it hard to argue.
ただ他の連中がなんていうか。
だったら早く連絡してくれ。何しろ時間がないんだ。
ちょっと待ってな。今聞いてみる。
Rogers suddenly stood up. He summoned a sword into his hand.
聞くって。おい、ちょっと何をしているんだ。
He sliced clear through the wall to the next apartment over, sending wood and mortar crumbling.
おい、壁を壊すんじゃない。ってまさか。
Before I could finish, I remembered Rogers' words. If Rogers had been telling the truth, then the apartment next door was a Barboran Imperial base. I peeked in hesitantly. My neighbors were all there, massaging their vanishing legs.
オラの足が全然戻らない。もっと強くマッサージしとくれ。多分血行が悪いんだよ。
Now that makes sense.
あれおいロッシュ、お前なんで壁なんか。おいお前らよく聞け。大事な話がある。
何よ、今こっちは大変なのよ。
それはこの俺ストライカーゼロが説明する。
なんだって。
I explained the situation once more, this time to all the Barborans.
本当だべか。そんなバカなことは信じられないべよ。
ふざけんな。だからって我々の上官を殺すことなんかできるか。
これがストライカーの罠じゃないという証拠でもあるのかい。
しかし現に体が消えかけているんだぜ。
じゃああんたはバルボラで生まれ暮らしてきたあの思い出が全て作り物だとでも言うのかい。帝国軍での厳しい訓練、悩み抜いた末の辛い肉体強化手術。私には夫と2人の子供がいた。夫亡き後家族を養うために2階級特進待遇の強化手術を受けた。私の息子たちが全て存在しないとでも言うつもりかい。
だがよ、俺は確かにバルボラ帝国が陸地すらないのを見てきたぜ。
そんなもの場所を間違えただけに決まっている。敵であるストライカーに協力し我々を裏切るというならここまでだ。
He sounds angry, but he looks like he's smiling.
我々3人は最後までミラー大佐と共に行動する。
With that, Murray, Orson, and Joseph left. Silence filled the room. Well, I never thought they'd all believe me anyway. I considered it a success that the remaining four didn't just dismiss me outright.
じゃあ残りの連中は協力すると考えていいんだな。
俺はまだ迷っている。
オラだってストライカーの言うことなんか信じてないべよ。でもここで生き延びないと国に残してきた妹に会えなくなってしまうべな。
Duran seemed to be speaking to himself.
そうね。たとえ真実がどうであろうと、今私が美少女として存在しているのは事実なんだし。
Just then the voice of the memory collector resonated through the room.
残り6時間30分です。
The color seemed to drain out of everyone in the room.
うお、なんか全身の色が一気に薄れやがった。
もう体が透けかけてしまってるべ。
こうなったら一刻も早くミラーを見つけないと。
結城さん、いやストライカーはここで待ってろ。
しかし
怪我人の助けなんかいらねえべ。
オラたちだけで十分だ。
それに誤解するな。一時休戦しただけで俺たちはお前の味方になったってわけじゃね
え。わかった。
フェニックス、お前はどうするんだ？
悪いが、もう少し考えさせてくれ。
Looking lost, Phoenix departed on his own.
よし、お前ら出撃だ!
Rogers flew out of the apartment, dragging the other two behind. We now go back a few hours to a ruined apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. But we'll do that next time on Dengeki Stryker. Thanks for watching and have a nice day. Bye bye.